Now, as we move to the idea of Saturn, let's see what we get. When we think about Saturn, it represents the ideal of control. Now, what does this mean? Now, we go based off of the tarot's interpretation of Saturn. The zodiac signs that are ruled by Saturn from a esoteric perspective, we have Capricorn and Pisces. Now, for those who may be familiar with traditional astrology, of course, they will include Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in later day astrology. But specifically when we're dealing with Hermeticism, they deal strictly with the 7 planets, which is the Sun, the Moon, Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, Venus, so on and so forth. They don't include the outer planets. That was a later day renovation of astrology, just to level the playing field so that nobody gets confused. So there is more than one way to view astrology. But specifically when we're dealing with Hermeticism, this is what perspective we're coming from and what we're dealing with. Now, when we think about Capricorn, we think about time management. When we think about Pisces, we think about the imagination or creative visualization. Also, when we break down Saturn, we get to number 3, which represents expansion. Capricorn is the 10th house. Pisces is the 12th house. So when we put all this together, when we think about Saturn, which represents the idea of control, what are you controlling? Your time management and your creative visualization. In other words, your worldly status, and your fantasy land, or your creative visualization, or your imagination. So when we think about worldly status, of course, the first thing comes to mind is your career. How do you make a living? Saturn also deals with limitations, boundaries, structure, and shape. So when we connect with the energy of Saturn, this helps us to bring all of these elements together and create a system that can be utilized in business to create wealth. So when we think about Capricorn or the 10th house, that's what it represents. Correct time management so that you can advance in your career, in your way of life, and that you can build a system or infrastructure to house your way of life. So this may come in the form of big business, building a website, something that takes a lot of attention to detail, which you get from Pisces, which controls the imagination or creative visualization. So on the surface, these two may appear to be opposites. What does your worldly status have to do with your creative visualization. But as we're starting to see here, they are one and the same. They are two different principles that come under the umbrella of Saturn, which represents control of your physical reality as well as your creative visualization, which allows you to expand because you are tapping into your imagination to see beyond the physical, and you are also making sure that you correctly manage your time so that you can build structure and shape matter around you. And what is matter? What is the building blocks of matter? Carbon. So Saturn and carbon have things in common. For example, carbon we know is 6 neutrons, 6 protons, 6 electrons. 666, right? Now, of course, this is associated with Satan. Satan, as we see, is just another word for Saturn, which essentially, when we break it all down and when it's all said and done, it literally just represents mathematics. Being able to tap into living mathematics, which is what? Time management. On an esoteric level is creative visualization. So the same way you will manage your time in the physical world to advance in your career or your way of life, it's the same method you use to expand your creative visualization or your fantasy land, because you understand that in order for me to be successful, I have to build an infrastructure of something that represents ideals beyond the physical. So of course you may have physical products, but if we're talking about actually changing and influencing lives beyond yourself, mainly yourself, because we don't have anybody to convince other than ourselves. And once we convince ourselves, it'll be a lot more easier to translate the message because we are now convinced instead of we're still trying to figure things out. But this is why we commit these things to memory and we walk with these sciences. Some people refer to these sciences as pseudosciences. However, when we walk with these sciences, such as astrology, numerology, supreme mathematics, supreme alphabet, so on and so forth, there are infinite layers to divination. When we walk and we see these things manifest right before our eyes, when we see living mathematics responding to our minds, because all is mental, when these things start to respond to our mind and we see that we actually have control and influence over this living mathematics or this time management or this creative visualization, it gives us a sense of power and prestige. So when we think about Saturn, we think about power and prestige. Now, the reason Saturn is connected with Satan is because most people associate power and prestige with wickedness. So this is why you can say every person that is successful or in the limelight always have those rumors of being involved with some type of underworld or some type of secret society, which is rooted in wickedness. So that energy will always be attached to anybody who finds success, whether it's true or not. So we're not here to say what is true and what isn't true. We're just here to outline why certain things have certain associations. So whenever we think about power and prestige, it's associated with wickedness, which creates the fear of success. A lot of people are afraid of success because they know that these stigmas are going to be attached to your name and to your brand, especially if we're talking about wealth. We're not just talking about rich, we're talking about wealth that can be passed on to generations, so on and so forth, like owning land and owning the actual buildings, not just having a business, but actually owning the building that houses the business as well as the land that has the building on top of it. Most people only think about starting a business. They're not thinking about, okay, if I keep the building, I can just rent this space out to somebody else and it'll be another source of income for me instead of me giving all my time to the business itself. Because you have to pay taxes to the land and you have to pay rent to the person that owns the building. However, when you got all of those things in line with each other, you're on a whole different playing field. So that's just a quick example of power and prestige and why these things are associated with things such as the devil or wickedness and something that's sinister. So it keeps a lot of people away from success because of these rumors. Now, again, whether they're true or not, it's up to the observer. Nonetheless, if we ever strive to have any major success, these are certain things that we're going to have to deal with at some point. So, from the Capricorn, we have career, which is basically your business mentality. And we have solitude. So you can say, how do people deal with power and prestige and having access to endless streams of wealth? How do you truly deal with that level of power? It requires you to be in solitude, or some people say vacation. It requires you to be in a state of solitude. You have to detach yourself from the world every now and then so that you can self-reflect. Self-reflect. Your inner principles start to be reflected in your business dealings. So you become righteous in your business dealings the more that you self-reflect. Meaning you have to always take yourself out of that business arena every now and then to purify yourself. Just as I was explaining with carbon, carbon is a natural purifier, especially when it's heated up. It allows you to purify yourself, being able to step away and be in solitude for a while, then come back even greater and stronger than you was when you left. Now let's go into the supreme mathematics and the supreme alphabet. So we have Satur, self-savior, Allah, truth or square, universe, ruler, now or end. S, the 19th letter, A is the first letter, T is the 20th letter, U is the 21st letter, ruler or R is the 18th letter, and N is the 14th letter. Now when we put all this together, what do we have? The savior of self is a law, which is your God consciousness. So when you grow in God consciousness, you become more aware of self, the higher worlds, as well as the lower worlds, and everything in between. And it becomes more evident who the Savior is instead of what the name of the Savior is or what location the Savior is. It becomes evident that all is within the mind, which is true for all dimensions. True for square going into the universe means the truth is true for all dimensions of the universe. So whenever we study the universal laws, these laws are true no matter what dimension you're on. So it isn't things that just apply to the physical realm. These principles apply to any realm, meaning all is mind. The first universal law applies in all dimensions. The law of correspondence applies in all dimensions. It isn't just one or the other, such as polarity. These laws exist on all realms, which is always measured in the here and now. Ruler, now or in other words, the truth is true for all dimensions in the universe, which is always measured in the here and now. Spontaneous manifestation will always take place. Let me write that down. So in other words, if you can't show and prove in the here and now, right now, whether you got to go back to the past or the future, if you can't show and prove this truth in the here and now, in the moment, using spontaneous manifestation, then it does not work. So we always know, if we want to know if something is rooted in truth, it should be able to be proven in the here and now, whether you're using the scientific method or not, because some things cannot be observed or measured using tools. The only tool we have to measure things beyond the physical is the mind or your creative visualization. So to sum it all up, the Savior itself is a law which is growing in God consciousness. When you grow in God consciousness, you start to come to the realization that the truth is true for all dimensions of the universe, which is always measured in the here and now. So again, if somebody can't show and prove in the here and now, then they need to go back and do some studies. When it can be proven in the here and now, you understand that you're dealing with truth, which is always rooted in universal wisdom. We out.